the car collided with an 18-wheeler. The collision caused me to have 2 strokes, break my femur, and it put me in a coma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, Stop the Internet Podcast. I'm Kelee.
And I'm Tricia.
And I'm Julia.
Today, we have a different style video. I'm like, how do we intro this? Okay, we have a special guest. Julia here is Tricia's sister. We are cousins. That was another thing. We would talk about our family background and everyone would be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And we're like, oh yeah, we're cousins.
Forgot to mention.
Yes, we're cousins. So we kind of hinted at this in an episode that Tricia and I recorded a few months ago, but Julia had a crazy experience being in a car accident, and the whole story is so crazy and wild and so interesting. So we're going to talk about it today. Do you want to give a little bit of background on who you are, like your age, what you do, what you're into? Set the scene for us so that everyone can become emotionally attached to you.
Hey, of course. Love that. My name is Julia. I am 20. I'm a senior now at University of Delaware, and I am majoring in fashion merchandising, and I'm just into fashion. I love upcycling, and I love sewing and all of that.
Should we jump in? I don't know exactly how this episode's going to go. I feel like let's just go for it and see what happens. Do you want to set the scene about what you were doing that weekend or when it was?
Okay, so it was in November 2021. I was a sophomore, and my roommate Devin and I, who I will be talking about her a lot, but my roommate Devin and I were asked to go to this one frat mountain weekend in the Poconos, and it was just like a ton of people at this huge house. I don't remember much of the weekend except 2 big things stick out to me. So the first thing that I remember is that Taylor Swift's All Too Well 10-minute music video came out. So naturally, Devin and I had to watch that. And then the only other thing I remember is pulling out of the driveway the day that the accident happened.
So it was when you were on your way home to your house at University of Delaware?
Yes, it was. I was driving and I was taking us home back to school down in Delaware. And I was driving on the highway and the car collided with an 18-wheeler. And there is still speculation about why the car collided with that 18-wheeler, but that was the scene of the accident, and the collision caused me to have 2 strokes, break my femur, and it put me in a coma. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about Devin, my roommate, her perspective. So she remembers us crashing, and then she looked at me because she was in the seat behind me, not directly behind me, but she was in the seat diagonal from me. And she remembers looking up at me, and she said it looks like I was just sleeping on the airbag. She was holding on to the handle thing in the car when we crashed, and it dislocated her arm. So her right arm was kind of dead weight at her side. She was calling my name and I wasn't reacting. So then she started slapping me with her left hand and I again wasn't reacting. So then she tried feeling for my pulse, but she couldn't get the right angle. So she was feeling the back of my neck. So obviously she wasn't feeling a pulse. Then she took out her phone. She texted in my group chat with my friends from school and she said, blah, 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 blah. And they all were like, what? And then she said, car accident. And they all were like, you're joking, Devin, you're kidding. This is a joke, right? Then she sent the text, Julia's passed out, going to hospital. And she sent a picture of her face that was just covered in blood. So all of my friends were spamming her with texts, spamming her with calls. She wasn't responding to any of them or picking up or anything. She did pick up for my friend Katya, and Katya said that it was real, and she heard Devin crying. She heard that she was bleeding, and she heard the cops talking, and then she hung up. And Devin said she has this story of before the EMTs arrived and while she was still sitting in the car, this man that was in one of the cars behind us on the highway got out of the car and he came to the car with an aluminum blanket and he offered it to Devin and he was helping her out before the EMTs got there. His name was Sid. We love him. And he is a part of the U.S. Army Special Forces. So he's a Green Beret. And we always just say that he was Devin's angel. sent down.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I keep getting the chills, like reliving this story, but it's so intense. And like every time you hear the details of something so jarring and like something that thankfully so few people experience, I guess what I'm getting at is it always feels scary or sad or crazy when you hear about an accident for anyone. But then when it's a loved one of yours and you know these people and you're picturing what it would actually be like to be in that car and like hearing Devon's account, because Julia, didn't you say you don't remember any of this?
None of it.
So the only account we have from this is Devon's memory of it, which Julie's explaining now. And it's just like insane to picture the two of them in this car in real life, like outside. Like I feel like there's a huge difference between like the idea of like, oh, a car accident and actually being there. It's just like so jarring and insane.
I know, it's interesting because like you hear about it and you're like, that would never happen to me or anyone that I know.
Yeah.
And when you do hear about it happening to other people, you don't hear all the details.
Yes.
You can picture it and you can make guesses about what happened, but like when it happens to a loved one, you actually get like the graphic details, which is like really, I don't know, just hard to handle and a weird experience. It'll be almost 2 years in November.
Yeah,
that
it will
this
be.
happened.
And so there's a lot of like different variations of what happened to me after the EMTs arrived, because the other people that were in the car with me, they were sent to the hospital, but I was driving, so it looked like the car was kind of like inverted and it looked like I was being impaled. So they had to cut the car, and that obviously took a little bit. So I got to the hospital like about half an hour after the others did.
It's so interesting to talk about the variations of the story because obviously the human brain is so weird, and like psychologists have said that like the human brain will change stories for, I'm sure, many different reasons, including trauma. But it is so interesting to think about all the different times that this story was told. And then as time goes on and your memory is coming back to you, like what we think actually did happen. I remember, I think Devon said that someone got out of a car and tried to pray the rosary with her. Did that actually happen?
Someone came over to the car and asked if she could pray over us.
Okay. So that did happen. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was just so many like spiritual things.
Yeah.
Like Sid being in the car behind us, being a Green Beret, offering to help. Just crazy.
Yeah. For the actual crash that happened, just to clarify, the car that you were in and driving was on the highway and you were driving, I think, on an off-ramp.
Yes.
And then the car collided with a tractor trailer.
That was
Okay.
stopped.
That was at a red light.
It went in kind of under like the side of the trailer, part of the tractor trailer.
Yeah, it hit
Yeah.
off the back tire, I think. There was a tire involved.
Yeah, see, that's where it gets foggy. Like, we have multiple police reports that we were able to see, and some of them, like, for the most part, all add up, but some small details are different, like where people were sitting in the car and, like, where people were when the EMTs arrived on the scene. And, like, we also have, like, texts from Devon that were going to Julia's roommates and then to our, like, my parents. So it's like 3 times removed from like the source of information. Like in the moment of the accident, there's adrenaline rushing, and like Devon was like recounting what happened. I feel like she recounted a few times like that day of what happened, and I don't know. It's just really hard to know exactly what happened because everything was going so fast and moving so fast, and like people were trying, I think, to like keep everyone updated and like spread the information of what was going on, but it was like new things were happening so quickly, like they were missing details or like miscommunications were happening.
Oh yes.
So
lots of miscommunications.
The day of the accident is a bit of a blur.
Yeah.
Even though like there were so many people there. It's very interesting. Like you were saying, the human mind is like it's can change things.
And it's also interesting to think about, like, of course, all of Devon's memories are going to be so from the side of emotion instead of just facts because she's dealing with this insane trauma, and then also considering her best friend that was in the car with her. So I'm sure Devon wasn't there like looking at the car, you know, analyzing the whole scene, wondering what actually happened and taking mental notes of that. It's like all she cares about is her best friend and herself. So that's even harder when it comes to remembering what actually happened. Trish, do you want to say what you were doing this day and the first word that you got?
Yeah.
This is weird. is.
It is weird. This was on a Sunday, and I work weekends, and when I work a weekend, I work Saturday and Sunday typically. So I was on night shift this weekend. So it was Sunday during the day, but I was asleep because I had a shift Sunday night into Monday morning. So I sleep during the day, and I had just worked the night before.
Trisha's a
I'm
nurse,
a nurse,
by the way.
Yes.
If you're new.
I don't sleep well during the day. I wake up on and off. Like, I don't really have good, like, blackout curtains. So the sunlight kind of, I feel like, messes with my circadian rhythm a bit. I usually fall asleep around 10. I woke up around 11. And I thought to myself, let me just check Julia's location. I knew she had been away for the weekend. So I was like, let me just... It was the first thought that came to my mind. So I checked her location around 11, and I saw that she was driving home from her mountain weekend that she was on. And she was like on a highway, and I was like, okay, cool, she's driving home. And then I fell back asleep. And then around 1 p.m., my older sister Emily knocks on my bedroom door. She doesn't live with us, but we had been having people over, which sounds weird because I was like sleeping. But November 14th was the day that this happened. And it's the anniversary of our grandmother's passing on my mom's side. And my mom kind of likes to get people together to remember, you know, like our loved ones that have passed. That's just like something that our family likes to do. We like gather for those things. So she had people over for like a brunch, just like our cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff. So Emily was there with her husband, and my parents got a phone call like in the middle of this, or not even the middle, it was the beginning. They hadn't even eaten any food or served any food, but they got a call that Julia was in a car accident, and they immediately left. Like, didn't know any details. They just were out the door.
Who called them?
Ashlyn, Julia's roommate, who also went to went to high school together, and then now they're in college together too, living together. Yeah.
Did they tell Emily and the cousins that were over what they said on the phone? So the only information is Julia was in a car accident, she's at this hospital.
Yes.
Okay.
From what I heard, see, it's all like what I heard, or like so and so said this. But from what I heard, my mom was like, Julia, what? Like, you know, everyone heard something was wrong with my mom's like reaction to the phone call. So then they let everyone know that they have to go. My whole family was there at my house. Emily came and knocked on my door. She woke me up around 1, and she's like, Julia was in a car accident. And I was like a little like out of it, and I was like, okay, you just don't think anything bad's gonna ever happen to people you know. So I was like, okay, like
fender bender, rear
yes,
ending,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So I was like, okay, like, do we know anything like about it? Like, I knew she was driving home, so I was like, do we know where she is? Is she okay? And Emily was like, I don't know, but I'm like really scared. And she like started crying, and I was still like waking up kind of. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's okay. So like we like hugged, and I went downstairs. I was like, okay, well, she's like reacting really, it's making me nervous. So I kind of was like, I'm not going to fall back asleep. She's like, you could probably keep sleeping, and like, so you can go to work tonight. And I was like, no, I'm not going to fall back asleep at this point. So I kind of got dressed, went downstairs. My whole family was still there, and they were like, we figured we would like still eat like this food and like then help you guys clean up, because it was like a big event that my mom wanted to host. So everyone was there. It was kind of comforting to have everyone around, but we also didn't really know what was going on. So Emily was getting text updates from my parents, like when they arrived at the hospital and like what was going on. But while they were driving, they were also texting Emily, and we were told Julia is unconscious. Then we were told Julia is actually okay, she's up and talking. And then we were told actually no, she needs surgery.
The reason that they got the information that was up and talking was because Devin was, when she went into the ambulance, she was like freaking out about me, and then the nurses, just to calm her down, were like, she's awake, she's fine, like your friend is fine. So Devin was like, oh, I'm just gonna tell everyone that she's okay. So everybody thought that I was fine, because that's what the nurses said to Devin, to just like relax her, just like calm her down a little bit.
Yeah. How far is the hospital from your parents' house?
About 45 minutes. Yeah, it's not like the closest hospital to us, but it was the closest hospital to the scene of the accident. And it actually worked out really well, because they're a level 1 trauma center, so they deal with this kind of stuff all the time. And Julia like received the best care there. My parents were very happy with everything that they experienced at this hospital. They were, the doctors, nurses, everyone was like really amazing. And like clearly she's doing really well now. So yeah, she just received the best care. So it worked out that like, even though this wasn't our first choice of hospital, you know, because it wasn't convenient for us, it was like the best place she could have been.
So then you're at the hospital. What happens next? Like, actually.
Right.
It is like so interesting to hear, like, this is what we think, or this is what Devin remembers. It's like, what actually happened? And I guess it is interesting if you want to keep talking about like what your family and friends thought was happening compared to what actually happened and the medical records.
Yeah.
Just spent 20 minutes for like, we think this happened.
Yeah.
It's
Like,
just
we're not
speculation. Yeah.
Okay, so when I got to the hospital, my school friends drove up immediately after they got Devin's text. They were like, okay, let's get in the car and just go to the hospital near them. So they got up there and they saw my parents. My parents were allowed to go into the room that I was in before I went in
Because it
for
was
surgery.
COVID. They were very strict on who could come into the hospital and who couldn't still. There were a lot of like COVID restrictions. This was November of 2021.
Yeah.
So there was still a lot of like rules in place about that.
So my parents went into this room that I was in before I went in for surgery. They said they just remember seeing like blood all over the floor. I broke my femur and I had a big gash on the side of my head, and I had a big gash also on the back of my ear, and like a cut on my calf that like went down to my bone. So I still don't have feeling around this area of my skin down there. So my ear was like hanging on by a thread. And so we always like to say there was like a rumor that was started by I don't know who, but someone started a rumor that my ear fell off. So we say to this day, actually, my ear is still at the scene of the accident. It's crazy.
Crazy.
It's wild.
It was never found.
Never found. Never recovered. So I was going in for surgery for my femur, and they put a probe in my skull to make sure that my brain wasn't bleeding or swelling, which it wasn't.
It was to measure her intracranial pressure. So like your skull is obviously a bone, and then it holds your brain, and if your brain swells or if there's like too much fluid like blood or other fluid that collects in the skull, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So it can make the pressure within your skull really high, and that can cause a lot of complications. So they're able to put a sensor. I don't work with neuro patients or in an ICU, so I don't know, a lot about this, but from my understanding, they could put like a probe into your head and just like measure the pressure and make sure that it's at a safe level.
And so more about like my injuries. That's more yours.
Yeah.
Your strong suit.
So I'll go over like really what happened with Julia, because even today, this morning, we were talking about the accident, and she was like, oh, they like drilled into my head, and I'm like, they didn't drill. They put
Which
a
was
probe.
news to me. I had no idea.
So even, like a year and a half later, Julia's still learning new stuff about what happened to her. But my parents have this notebook here, and they took very detailed daily notes of everything that Julia went through, which is very cool to look back on. So like Julia said, she broke it was her left femur. You have the cut that really hasn't healed. There's a scar tissue on your left leg. It's right there. Yeah. She has some cool scars if you're watching on YouTube on her leg from her femur surgery.
Are we allowed to show we can take pictures and put them in, and I know there was pictures from the crash from police reports and fire department reports. Are we allowed to put those in, or do you want us to put those in? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we'll insert some here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Some of the pictures of the car are public information because they're on the township's fire department website, which I didn't know that was a thing, but they posted them. It looked like her right ankle was very swollen, which was interesting because later in her recovery, she experienced some pretty bad foot drop of her right foot, which is when you can't hold your foot up. Essentially, it just kind of points because it is limp almost, so it makes it very hard to walk. So when she was relearning how to walk, her right foot dragged a bit. So I thought that was interesting that the day that it happened, my mom actually was the one who noticed that her right ankle was pretty swollen. Her carotid artery on her left side of her neck had some partial detachment of the inner wall of the artery, which could cause a lot of complications, especially with blood flow to your brain. They were just watching it. They weren't concerned for any current injury. It didn't cause any complications at the time. Her right lung looked had a slight pneumothorax, which is air in your lung, I believe. I really hope I don't sound dumb.
Air that isn't supposed to be in your lungs.
Yeah, so your lungs are in a cavity, and your lungs, I guess you could say, are soft, and the cavity maybe is a bit harder. So sometimes if air gets in between the lung and the cavity, it can push the lung so it can't expand fully.
Oh, wow.
If that makes sense.
And see, I thought my lung collapsed.
Yes,
which was
exactly.
also news this morning that it did not.
Which, it's similar, so it's easy to mix that stuff up, especially my parents were probably relaying a lot of this information to Julia after she came out of her coma and stuff, and they're very intelligent, but they're not in the medical field, so a lot of this stuff was hard for them to understand to begin with. So I think that's also why there was some miscommunication. It also says here that the right side of Julia's body had a little bit less movement and like reaction when they would test like pinching and test like sensation and stuff. And the left side of her brain had suffered strokes. There was some bleeds in the left side of her brain, which then corresponds.
Brain injury.
Yes. So then that corresponds to the right side of your body. So that makes sense that her right side was not as like active at that time.
So the right side of the brain controls the left side of your physical body and vice versa?
Yes.
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Your nerves all come together at like a central point in your brain and then they cross.
And also, my neurologist at my rehab facility later explained to me, like a 5-year-old basically, traumatic brain injuries, and he was like, your brain is basically made up of a bunch of rubber bands, and you stretch the rubber bands and they can stretch, but like as soon as one breaks, you can't put it back together and it can't be healed.
She had a few lacerations, like she said, behind her ear, which a plastic surgeon actually was able to repair and minimize the scarring. She had a laceration on the left side of her skull, which they stitched, and then on the right front side of her forehead, I remember she did have like some of her hair shaved, which really upset my mom because Julia loves her hair so much.
I do.
Obviously, again, if you're watching, you can
it's
see.
Iconic.
Yeah, it's very curly. She takes very good care of it. Curly girl hair routines and everything.
And I had a huge knot in my hair that was made up of just like blood, and it took like...
And like matting. Like when people are moved around a lot, like on pillows, and they're transferred from stretchers to different beds and all that stuff, your hair, you know, slides around under your head and it mats together pretty badly. And a lot of times we just cut off the knot or shave it off or whatever. And my mom was determined to fix this knot because she's like, Julia loves her hair. I cannot let her lose her hair. So I think for over a week, she was using creams and oils. Our older sister, Emily's friend Rachel, is a hairdresser, and she gave us all these really nice hair products. Like, it was really generous of her.
Like
and
Olaplex.
Yeah, just really good stuff. My mom tried everything, and she finally got the knot out after over a week. And then the really cute and nice techs in the ICU where Julia was, they braided her hair so that it wouldn't go back into a knot again. She also had a broken nose, and I think that was it, which it's like, oh, that's it.
That's all.
But she was on a ventilator. She was sedated, but she was in like a non-medically induced coma. So she was sedated in case she did wake up. From my understanding, you don't want to wake up and be on a ventilator. That's terrifying and scary and painful. So they kept her sedated, but the coma itself was just because of Julia's brain injury.
I think this is going to be so interesting to talk about, and just getting into the details of Julia being in a coma, because as someone who was an outsider and not in the medical industry or field at all, I had no idea what was going on and what these updates meant. And Trish, actually, one of my questions for you was, as a nurse, you have way more knowledge about the medical industry than an outsider would. Do you think that that knowledge that you had helped you in this process, or it made you more scared and anxious and nervous because of the severity of the injuries and the treatments?
Both. So that Sunday when it happened, I still went to work that night. I think I was mostly in shock.
Oh, you went to work that night?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, I don't okay, yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I worked my full 12-hour shift on like 3 hours of sleep.
A dedicated nurse.
You know.
Exactly. So dedicated.
No, all my coworkers were like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, I think so. I think I was in shock, really. But once my parents got to the hospital, they did call us. It was Emily, her husband Dan, and I were home. We have a brother, Bill, who's married and lives in Philly, and he was being updated. And then our brother, Thomas, lives in Colorado, and he was also being texted. But the three of us were together, so our parents called us, and we had them on speakerphone, and they gave us an update. Like, Julia had emergency surgery on her femur because she was bleeding a lot from it. They had to repair that. So I was like, okay, like, that's fine, that's expected. The last thing I had heard, though, was that she was, like, conscious and talking. And then my parents go, oh, and she's, like, on a ventilator. And I was like, wait, what? Turns out she had never been awake and talking. There were concerns for, like, brain injury and, like, you know, all those terrifying things that come to your mind when you think of, like, brain injuries. And so they're like, yeah, and she's like on a ventilator in the ICU. And I remember I just like lost it because I was like, okay, that is way worse than what I thought. and like what I was expecting to hear in that moment. So that kind of just like shook me. Emily and Dan were also listening, and I don't want to speak for them, but they were so calm during that phone call. And then like they heard the ventilator thing. They didn't really react to it, but I had more of a reaction to it. I don't know if it's from like lack of understanding what that meant, but then I think we were all kind of like scared. So I was very scared in that moment, but then like hearing about all the other stuff that was going on and like what was being done for it was comforting, because I have like a pretty good understanding of everything. So it was helpful to know. And I find that like when I'm at work, scary things will happen, but because I understand exactly why they're happening and what to do for them, I'm very calm in like emergency situations and stuff. Like we can have people, I don't know, their vitals are just tanking and it's scary and you have to act fast, but like I for the most part know why, and I know what to, like the next steps to take, who to call, all that stuff. So I can just stay very calm, and it's just solely based on like the understanding of what's going on. So I think like from that perspective, I was like calm about everything going on with Julia because I understood it. But then also knowing the potential complications and what the unknowns of the future are with like a brain injury, like I was terrified.
Also, our sister-in-law, Heather, she is also a nurse, and she said as soon as she heard that I was on a feeding tube, then she got scared. It was like that moment for her. Like everyone had different moments where like certain things would scare them the most, and she said that was the moment like she was scared the most.
Yeah, it's so interesting because as an outsider, I'm sure Emily and Dan's reaction to that was maybe similar to mine, where it's like, oh, she's on a ventilator. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, a treatment for someone who needs a ventilator. As a nurse, I'm sure you were in the vibe of like, to get to that point, it has to be bad. And an outsider would have no knowledge of that.
Yeah, like that's what I was trying to get at. Like, right. I think that you just hear all these like medical terms and treatments and you're like, okay. Like some of them sound scarier to like an outside person from the medical field when it's really not, and then some things like should sound scary and people don't realize like how serious they are. Yeah.
I think something that also confused me and something that I realized I didn't understand was the difference between being in a coma, being in a medically induced coma, and then being sedated. So they would be like, oh, she's in a non-medically induced coma, she's sedated, like blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I think I know the difference between medically induced and non, but then it's like sedated. I didn't even know what that meant until you just said it. So yeah, that's the reason for it, is because she was not in a medically induced coma. And I guess, is this correct? In theory, you could wake up from a coma at any point.
Essentially. And also, I believe they were probably trying to give her brain a break and let it heal, or at least begin to heal itself. Another thing that I found interesting throughout this whole journey was that Julia, when she woke up from her coma, it was over a matter of like weeks.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It wasn't like she woke up, opened her eyes, and was talking, and she was like sleeping and then awake. It was more of a very, very gradual, drawn out process of waking up.
Like one day I was like fluttering my eyes more, and then like the next day I was like moving my hands a little bit more. Different things would happen each day to like signify that I was getting to that point of being awake.
That is something that is so interesting to me, because when you watch shows and movies, when someone's in a coma, in these movies, they're laying in a bed, their eyes are peacefully closed, they're smiling, or maybe not smiling, but like they just look like they're asleep, and they're just sitting up in the bed, so peaceful. And then one day they open their eyes and they say, oh my God, Mom, is that you? Like, what happened?
What year is it?
And then they're just
Where
awake
am I?
now. And then they're like, okay, well, I can go home and live my normal life.
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked to learn that is absolutely nothing like real life, or at least Julia's case of real life.
Yeah.
So do you want to go into more detail about, Trish, especially you, seeing Julia in the bed and maybe the first, or actually, I guess we kind of got sidetracked from your parents' notes day one, and maybe we can go back into your parents' notes on day two, but what happened next? Like, she goes into this surgery, she has all these injuries. What happens after she gets out of this surgery? Like, who's taking care of her? Where is she? What state is she in?
So she goes to a trauma ICU, which, like I said earlier, she was like in the best possible hospital to go, because not all hospitals have trauma ICUs. They don't specialize in trauma, so it was like perfect for her. Yeah, my parents wrote very detailed notes. I don't even know like where to begin, and I don't want to like bore people, but it sounds like they were doing scans like MRIs, like I said, monitoring her brain. She was sedated. They were adjusting the ventilator, trying to see if, she could start breathing on her own, because she was on a setting where it was pumping air into her lungs and pulling it out. There's different settings on ventilators where people can initiate the breath, and then the ventilator will make sure that they get enough air into their lungs, and then the person, I guess, can breathe out on their own. There's just different settings, and like I said, I don't work in an ICU, so I learned it in nursing school. We had to memorize the vent settings, but I couldn't tell you right now what those are. But there are different options. So Julia was having literal, perfectly measured air going into her lungs and being pulled out. She wasn't doing a single thing on her own. They were just checking everything, what I would assume is a common workup for someone that went through what she went through. So like I said, they had MRIs of her brain. They saw strokes. They looked at her kidneys, her heart, saw her lungs had air in them where it shouldn't be. There's just so many details. I think it was my parents were just writing every single thing down because they didn't truly understand what was going on. But it's so cool to look back on, because some of the stuff I probably wouldn't have thought was important to write down, and I wouldn't have written it down. But I actually appreciate how much detail. They were saying she has a slight fever today, which is interesting because Julia's brain seemed to not be regulating her vital signs well enough because of her brain injuries. So she was having fevers. Her blood pressure was very high.
Yeah, my heart rate kept shooting up at way high at some points, up in the 200s, right?
Yeah.
It was alarmingly
and that
high.
Was something that Julia dealt with even for months after.
Oh yes,
she was okay.
Yes.
Her heart rate is still a little wonky.
My resting heart rate for a while was 150, just resting.
What's normal for what we're at right now?
60 to 100.
Wow.
Yeah.
They did try to extubate Julia, which means take her off the ventilator 2 times, I believe, and they were unsuccessful. So then about 10 or so days after the accident, they put in a tracheostomy, which is a breathing tube in your neck. You have a lower chance of getting pneumonia, which Julia had acquired pneumonia from being on the vent. That's pretty common to get an infection in your lungs because you have a tube going right into your lungs. So bacteria can travel there so easily. So she had a trach placed, which is just a safer form of an airway. It's very reliable. People will pull out ventilator tubes from their mouths, and then it's a process to re-intubate them.
But I pulled out my trachea tube.
You did, but it's easy just to pop it back in.
Okay.
What does it mean to be unsuccessful in extubating?
She can't breathe on her own yet.
Okay, so they basically took out this breathing tube, and then they're like, oh shit, she's not breathing, we need to put it back in.
Okay. Or she was struggling to breathe. They watched her oxygen saturation, which is something that you can do. It's just a little clip on your finger usually, or on your earlobe, and you just see how much oxygen is in your blood and going to your peripheral organs, far from your core. And so they probably saw that her oxygen dropped pretty low. She wasn't taking in enough air on her own, pushing out enough carbon dioxide out of her body. So they had to re-intubate her twice.
And during all of this, you're in an ICU, which is that, can we picture that as just the typical hospital room that people picture?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Julia is unconscious during this time, and she just kind of has care. How often are nurses coming in and working with her? How often are doctors and nurses planning to try the next step and the next piece of treatment?
So just from my experience, and my understanding, in an ICU, nurses only have 1 to 2 patients in an ideal setting because they require so much care. I would say bare minimum, nurses are in your room every 2 hours, but most likely more often than that. Giving you medicine, cleaning you up, just a million things. I'm saying the most basic things, and I feel that's not giving nurses credit. They do so much.
They do every single thing that a normal person's body does on its own. A nurse is now doing it for another human. Yeah. That is so amazing.
Yeah, but there's also other people too. There's respiratory therapists that are checking the ventilator. They're focusing on her breathing and all of that important stuff. There's a bunch of doctors consulted. Julia probably had her primary trauma doctor who was coordinating most of her care, but then she also had the infectious disease doctor and the heart doctor and probably a pulmonologist involved. Like millions of doctors all coming to see her, giving their 2 cents on what's best for her and putting in orders for the nurses to do. But when someone comes in the hospital, literally within minutes, you're immediately trying to get them out of the hospital. So you're working towards healing them. For example, if someone comes into the hospital and gets their hip replaced and they have to stay for a night or two, the minute they come back to their hospital room from the OR after their hip replacement, you want them up and walking around. Which sounds crazy and probably painful, but we try and manage your pain, but we want you up and walking around, because the faster you're up and moving and doing stuff for yourself, the faster you're getting out of there. You're avoiding like blood clots, you're avoiding your intestines from stopping working, because when you just sit in bed, this was an issue that Julia had, your intestines like kind of stop moving stuff through them. But like your blood flow slows down, you can form clots, which was a risk for Julia, so she was on like medicine to prevent that. And like your lungs don't work as well, like because you're not needing to take in deep breaths, so you're only taking in like half breaths. And then once it comes a time that you need to take in a deep breath, it's harder for you because your lungs are like a muscle. But yeah, just stuff like that. I feel like I'm droning on.
It seems like it's dangerous to be in a hospital.
Yes.
So I guess the whole goal is to get this person out living on their own.
Yeah.
I think
to
that
not
was
get in a hospital in the first place.
Yeah. Well, that's something that I didn't understand about hospital care, because you do hear stories about people that get surgeries and then the nurses are like, all right, get up, start walking. And you're like, oh my God, can I have a minute? But it's like, no, because the longer you have a minute and sit there and don't go about your daily life, it's going to only be harder to get back into your normal way of living.
Yes,
like it just makes everything harder on your body. So I guess it means if you don't move it, you lose it.
Yeah.
I guess so.
You need to help people with motivation sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're like, no. And I'm like, no, we got to do this.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay, Julie, do you want to talk about being in the coma and get into that?
Of course. Okay, so my coma, I have no memory of being in it whatsoever. It's like my life stopped on November 13th, really. This happened on the 14th, but the last memory I really have is like from the 13th, and my life just took a little pause and then picked back up again around like Christmas time. So it's just like a solid month of my life just like wiped from my brain. Still to this day, people ask me like, what dreams did you have? Oh my God, what people came to you? Like, who visited you? And I'm like, I don't know. I would love to know that also. Like, I have no idea. When I was in this coma, I wasn't lying still at all. I was constantly flailing around, and my tongue was swollen beyond belief because of the ventilator that went down my throat. And because I was like biting on my tongue, my eyes were wide open and they were going 2 different directions. So I was just like, I just did not look peaceful by any means. So they don't represent it well in the media at all.
Yeah.
It's such a Hollywood like vibe in movies. It's like Hollywood magic, and everything is like, oh, like an angel comes down, you see the light, you turn away from the light, you take a 5-day nap, and then you wake up and everything's normal. And it's like, where did we get that story from?
I was
because
like,
it wasn't from a real patient.
Emily and I always say that everyone's like laying there just like with their eyes closed, so peaceful, but I was like, I was just like so out of it.
And Thomas our brother came to visit, but he visited Julia in the hospital at one point, and he was like, are her eyes gonna stay like that? Because they were actually in two different directions.
That's shocking.
Yeah, our mom's like, is that your main concern? No, it was just funny.
And also, since I had a stroke and I had the left-sided brain injury, my face was drooping, so I couldn't make any facial expressions, really. I couldn't smile, and I couldn't move the entire right side of my body. I had to like relearn how to even just like pick up my arm and like put it back down. I had to relearn how to like hold things and how to move my right hand and stuff. And of course I'm right-handed, so like that was just perfect for me. So I don't remember a single moment of like being in the coma or of waking up, but I was transferred to a rehab facility one day around Christmas. It was like a switch just kind of flipped in my brain, and it was like suddenly I knew what my name was. Like I knew how old I was. I knew that I was in college and that I wasn't in 8th grade. 'Cause for a while it was like every day that went by in this rehab facility after I like started coming to, it was like one day I thought I was in 8th grade. Then like the next day I thought I was in freshman year. The next day I was a sophomore in high school. But then my parents were like, no, you are in college. And then like I started having some idea of who my friends are, because like my parents printed out pictures and they set up pictures of like what I looked like and me with all of my friends and stuff, and they just had these mementos all around my room, and they were really, really helpful. But my one friend who we were just talking about, who is my roommate and lifelong friend, and in both of my friend groups from home and from school, she really confused me. She really threw me off, because I saw a picture of her in both my school friends and my home friends, so I was like, I think I'm making her up, because there was also so many things that I was making up. Like, I was making up, more often than not, I was making up stories. I was just making up scenarios, and I had my own idea of what happened and why I was in the hospital, but none of it was true by any means. And it was just like the only thing that I could say to myself to make sense. And like, I thought my friends, like I thought my one friend worked in Acme, and she never did. And I thought my one friend worked in Plato's Closet. She never did. Like, I just had these weird memories of just things that never happened.
It's so weird, because it's like, why did your brain do that? Like, was it just trying to make connections between all these things in your mind? Like, you know of Acme, you know of this friend, you know of this friend, and it's like, oh, they connect through that. Like, it's, the brain is insane. So how long was it from like you were here on day one getting your femur surgery to you're in the bed and thrashing all around, moving, you have this ventilator in? What is like the first day where Julia is coherent and speaking to family members or nurses? Do you guys remember that?
I feel like when I was like waking up, it took me a very, very long time to speak.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't speak for a good like 3 weeks. There was not a word that I said. Like, my nurses would write down the alphabet, and I would like point to letters of like the things that I was trying to say, but I wouldn't speak by any means at all.
Oh, I do remember one of the nurses had like brown nail polish on, and you were trying to write BRO, and everyone was like, what does this mean? Like, BRO, what is she saying? And then Julia was trying to say, I like your brown nail polish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cute.
That was at Reading Hospital.
Oh, okay.
Which is where she was first, like in the trauma and then like the step down units and stuff. But I feel like when you went to the rehab hospital was when you started speaking.
Yes.
She didn't speak at all in the original hospital. And then it even took some time, I think, at the rehab hospital.
Because my first memory really is my mom's birthday, which is December 15th. I remember my parents walking in to visit me during visiting hours, because I could only have 2 visitors. They brought like a little cupcake and stuff. For some reason, I was just like, this is a memory in my brain, because I was like, I feel bad that my mom has to spend her birthday in a hospital with her daughter. Like, it was so sad for me.
Yeah.
And for her too. Like, I can't even imagine.
So what happened in the time between being in the ICU and going to the rehab center? Like, what steps did Julia take so that the doctors said, oh, she's ready to go and move on?
Based on these notes, it looks like she was in the ICU 11 days, I want to say. And then she was able to move down to a step-down unit. She was not on the ventilator. They were finally able to take her off the ventilator. She did have the trach in her neck, which originally was like hooked up to the ventilator, and then they eventually just moved it to regular oxygen just to give her like extra oxygen, but it wasn't helping her breathe, like with the mechanism of breathing, it was just giving her extra oxygen.
And during that time, is she still technically in a coma?
She wasn't sedated. When you're in the ICU, I just want to say again, like, I don't know everything, but I do know that like when you're sedated, they give you sedation vacations, which they stop the sedative medication from going into your bloodstream, and they try and see like if you'll maybe come out of your sedation. And there's different reasons for that. Also, it's just good for people to not be like consistently sedated for days and days and days. So Julia had a few sedation vacations. I don't know when they officially stopped it, but it looks like it was after 11 days that she was officially stopped with the sedative. If she was like asleep or unconscious, it was like on her own accord. It wasn't because of a medication. So I guess you could say that's when she had the first chance to like wake up from her coma. So slowly she began to come to after they stopped that sedative, but she was still not fully conscious.
What is a step-down unit?
It's just like slightly less intense care than the ICU.
Okay.
There's just different levels of care, and sometimes you have to like upgrade people's level of care if they're a little bit more unstable and they need like further monitoring of like their heart, or you know, like Julia's brain, or they need to be on a ventilator. Like you'll just like move them up kind of like the chain
Yeah.
until they're at like a safe place where they can, you know, be monitored adequately.
During that time in the ICU and the step-down unit, so you guys were taking turns visiting her, right? Your parent, because only 2 people could be there at one time. So your parents would go, and then you and Emily would go, or Emily and Dan, her husband, would go. So during that time, were you just kind of looking at Julia? Were you talking to her? Like, obviously she wasn't answering you because she was being sedated, but what was it like being in the room with her?
So actually, Reading Hospital gave us like a special 2-person pass. They actually had a 1-visitor rule for COVID reasons, but because Julia was 19, like still legally an adult, but like super young, so they were like, okay, well obviously we'll let both of her parents visit. So for the first few days, only my parents went. They were just like in a state of like survival. I felt like it didn't even dawn on them to like maybe have the siblings visit. So then finally they were like, actually, do you guys want to go? So then one at a time, like my mom and I went one day together, and then my dad and Emily were able to go one day together, and then like Thomas and my mom. So we took turns, but mostly it was just my parents. But when I was there in the ICU, Julia was like just laying there. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
There's videos of like my mom holding my hand and like rubbing my leg and stuff, and she's like, "You're beautiful, honey." And I was like just sitting there like eyes wide,
like, tongue sticking
tongue
out,
huge, sticking out, like drooling. And she was like, "You're beautiful, you're gorgeous." And I was like,
yeah,
a face only a mother can love.
Yeah. No, everyone's beautiful no matter what, but it was funny looking back. And
yeah, now that we can look back
and laugh about it. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, we would sit and talk to her in the ICU. Like I said, there was just always nurses and respiratory therapists, doctors. Everyone was always in the room, so there wasn't like a ton of downtime. Not that we were doing anything, but like we were constantly talking to people about her plan of care and her condition and everything. But when we were just alone, we would like hold her hand, talk to her. She, right from the start, she was able to respond to commands slightly. Like we would say give a thumbs up, and her thumb would like twitch a little, but you could see her kind of trying to make a fist and lift her thumb. So she could kind of respond to commands. So I felt like there was a lot of that, like constantly trying to like get through to her and see if there was any
and I would do the peace
response.
Sign. That was a big thing. The peace sign was like,
she got very good at the peace sign, and my parents like used that as Julia's sign.
Yeah. That's while you were in the coma still. Okay, I'm like using air quotes like coma. No, it is. It's a coma. Okay, got it. I think that is such a huge misconception about comas. Like I was so wrong when it came to any knowledge surrounding this. Like it's so interesting that you guys were talking to her in this coma and you were almost responsive, but you don't remember a thing about it.
Yeah, I don't remember being able to hear anything.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
I don't remember a single thing.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what she could hear too, or what she would remember.
Right.
Because people always say, oh, like, make sure you talk to people in the hospital, like, they're there, like, don't talk about them when you're standing right next to their bed, like, show respect, and you don't know what they can hear, even though they can't talk or open their eyes, maybe. So we were, like, constantly talking to her, and we're like, you got this, or we would be like, try and do this, like, if there was something she needed to do that the doctors would recommend, we'd be like, okay, Julia, like, try and do this. Like, we were constantly, like, talking to her, but yeah, she doesn't remember any of it.
No.
But it's like that still probably made a difference, though.
Probably.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay, so then it went from that to she made a few steps, like the tubes were taken out, the trach was taken out, no more feeding tubes.
No, my feeding tube
So-
actually got
in.
removed in like January after I got out of the hospital.
okay.
Yeah, so I had that for a while.
Okay.
So,
But I wasn't like actively using it. I just like I was able to like start eating physical food in like the middle of December.
Okay.
So that's when they stopped using the feeding tube.
I just want to clear up some things. So when Julia was in the ICU, she had a nasogastric tube placed, which goes down your nose into your stomach, and that's how we could provide like nutrition to people. So she had that first, but the goal of that typically isn't long-term use. I guess actually for some people they do go home with that, but that was taken out relatively quickly when they thought she might be taking longer to heal. So they did the trach tube, like I said earlier. It's like a very safe like airway to have. It's reliable. So in case like her mouth and throat stop working, the trach in her neck is like definitely guaranteed to work for the most part, but it is more of a long-term solution. So they were expecting like her to have to use this for long-term breathing. And then at the same time as that, they placed a peg in her stomach, which just is like a little tube that goes through your skin right into your stomach. So they took out the nose tube and put in like a stomach tube. And both of those, the goal is kind of to be in her body like long term to help her heal, but expecting that this might be like a long road. So she had these tubes in her, like the trach and the peg, while she was at the rehab hospital as well. They were able to take out the trach while she was at the rehab hospital, but the peg had to heal for I think at least 6 weeks before they could safely remove it. So she had it in her stomach but wasn't using it because she didn't need to, but we were just waiting to safely remove it.
And after I stopped needing to be fed through the feeding tube and I started being able to eat like physical food, I'm a vegetarian, just like backstory. The first meal that they gave me, the first physical food, was chicken. Of course, naturally.
Oops. Sue.
Yeah.
That's it. That's enough.
Run it back.
Yeah.
Wow. How do you feel about that?
I feel disrespected, to say the least.
Yeah.
Wait, really?
Yeah, really.
Well, no one.
That's interesting.
I don't think anyone asked.
My parents were like, "Oh, we should have told you that."
How fucking dare those doctors and nurses?
How dare
they?
they?
What is their job?
How dare they?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's my suggestion.
Do you remember eating that though? Or
No.
is that like, okay, that was
That's
kind of still when
also
you're
in
coming
my-
out.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
But I do have, weirdly enough, like this one memory of being fed in my feeding tube because my one nurse walked into my room with like a jar of water and this like powder, which is like the nutritional food. And she poured it in and like mixed it up and stuff. And then she like filled up the syringe. And she like stuck it in my tube. So I do have that memory. But then I also do have like memories of me eating actual food. So I just have like a lot of messy memories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you were taken to the step-down unit and then the rehab center, which is a different building, or is that still part of the
Totally
hospital?
different hospital.
Totally different.
Okay.
Different healthcare like
Oh,
agency and everything.
got
Yeah.
it. Okay. So did your parents choose that place? Okay. And then was that closer to our hometowns? Got it.
I just want to like make sure the timeline is clear. She was in the ICU, talked about all the tubes and everything that were in there, and then in the step-down unit, that is when she really started working with physical therapy and occupational therapy. So they started working with her in the ICU because, like I said, like the minute you're in the hospital, you want to start working on getting out of the hospital. So physical therapy and occupational therapy and speech therapy were involved with her in the ICU, but could only do so much because of her state. Once she was off the ventilator, they immediately were like, okay, let's get her up out of bed. Let's get her standing up. They started working with her with a walker, getting her up to sit in her chair. Occupational therapy, I remember, was trying to get her to like wash her face on her own. So that was in Reading Hospital, like in the step-down unit. She started to make a lot of strides, like physically with that kind of a thing, but still was in like a foggy brain state, like was not speaking a word. She was like alert, like eyes open, looking around, and like you could tell she was listening to us, but she wasn't very responsive to what we were saying.
And during this time, is this still considered a coma?
I would say it's like, I mean, I don't know, but it felt like it would be part of her coma.
Okay.
Because she doesn't have any recollection of it, and she was just so out of it. Like, she could follow simple commands, and she could shake her head no and like nod yes and stuff, but it didn't feel like she was there still. Like, lights were on, but no one was home still. But yeah, she was making like crazy progress. So that, I think, is when they decided, okay, she's good to go to rehab, where they'll really start working her, you know, getting her walking, doing like the art therapy, speech therapy. She was doing like math problems and all that stuff at rehab, and, you know, just fully working on like getting her better once all of her like acute issues were for the most part solved. Like her, you know, her femur was fixed in surgery, like her lung was starting to heal itself with the air, and they did all the surgeries and everything they had to do in that regard, and now it was just like a matter of getting her back to her original state.
When it comes to like being in a coma, do doctors, because my question was she still in a coma when she was in this step down unit doing all these activities? Do doctors even like care to define if she's in a coma or not?
No, she had like a neurotherapist. I don't know if that's the right term, but she had like a neurologist. She had all of these specialists still involved in her care. So maybe they were more focused on that and defining like where she was in her healing process. I wasn't there for a majority of discussions. It was mostly my parents that were allowed in the hospital. I don't know everything still to this day that like went on, but I have what is in this journal and I have in my brain what happened. So I don't know if they were focused more on that, and my parents weren't aware, I wasn't aware, okay. But maybe they were really focused on that. Yeah. But we were more like focused on her standing up and like cheering her on for that, because those were like huge, big positive things happening. So that's where our focus was for the most part.
Yeah. And then I kind of remember doctors were saying Julia was healing faster than they thought. Do you have any knowledge on what the doctors thought was going to happen, or what did they tell your parents? Like, did they kind of like make it seem worse than it is, or kind of like give your parents like worst case scenario, this is going to happen? Like, do you guys have any memories about that?
Yeah. They did give us the worst case scenario, and I think my parents didn't tell my siblings and I the full, prognosis that they had gotten, but they were told that she had like a very low recovery rate based on the spot where her brain injury was. Because really? I know that
yeah. See, like I'm still learning.
I know.
So.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. So I know that we've been saying she had like strokes, but they were also calling it a traumatic brain injury, like a TBI. So Julia is a TBI survivor.
I still have that.
Yeah, but
I mean, for years,
yeah. So she's still recovering from that. But from what I heard, my parents were told that the location in her brain where this TBI happened had like a very low recovery rate. And we were also told that like when she wakes up from this coma, based on the position of where like her strokes and everything were, she could be very mad, just like not have the same personality as before, and like be like aggressive, angry, sad, all these things. I think it was just, they gave us like worst case scenario, and it was very grim for a while because we didn't know what she was gonna look like when or if she did wake up. It was just a lot of like unknowns, and it was very upsetting.
So when they say that based on her injuries there's a low chance of recovery or full recovery, what would have happened if she didn't recover? Would she just kind of remain in this sedated phase for, in theory, the rest of her life?
I guess. I don't even know, because like everyone is different. So I guess it would depend on like what my parents wanted for Julia, and then also like, what kind of recovery she was making, if any. Like if there was even a little bit of like a glimmer of hope, maybe with her using her hands, or I don't, like even like the smallest thing, like maybe that would have driven her medical care in some direction that I don't even know from like where we are right now. Could have gone in a different direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that's something that's interesting as an outsider, and people are like, oh, well, when someone's in a car accident and they have a traumatic brain injury, it's like they go into a coma and then they wake up, or they don't wake up. And it's like there are so many things that affect the next step, and it could be as little as someone moving their hand when you tell them like move your hand, pick it up. That could change the trajectory of their entire care and their entire life.
There's so many in-betweens.
Yeah,
between the being asleep and waking up.
Right.
There's so many in between.
Like
that's
maybe
crazy.
You could have been bedbound, but we would have like continued to care for you because you would be like awake but maybe just unable to use your body, or like some type of like paralysis or something, or maybe you would be in a wheelchair but maybe unable to speak. Like there were so many possibilities that could have happened that would have like sent her in one direction or another as far as like her healing process and everything.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk at all about your mental health during that?
So the rehab facility that I was transferred to was just amazing, and it was one of the best ones in the state, right?
Yeah.
If not like the best.
Yeah, very good.
And they like taught me how to talk again. They taught me how to walk again. They taught me how to like lift up my arms. They taught me everything. And I am a rather determined person, and I am stubborn when it comes to myself, and I'm like so independent. I think the hardest part of my physical recovery was being able to like accept the fact that I couldn't do virtually anything on my own, and I had to have help to go to the bathroom, to take a shower, to brush my teeth, wash my face, all of the most basic things ever. I had to have help for that, and that was just such a hard thing for me to accept. Since I was so stubborn, I used this as like kind of a motivation. So when I was working with my physical and occupational therapist, they would always be like, okay, let's take a break now. Like, what if do you want to take a break? And I was always like, nope, I don't. I want to work through it. I just like want to keep going. So I was so like desperate to do things on my own, mainly to like prove to myself that I could get better and like could return to the way that I was before. From a mental recovery aspect, for the first 6 months, there wasn't a day that went by where I wouldn't cry, because I was just so upset about like the state that I was in and like all this therapy that I had to go through for the next few months. I would look at pictures and videos of like my old self and like the old me. My mom said like I would avoid mirrors at all costs, because like I would look at myself in the mirror and I like had no idea who that was. I did not recognize myself at all. So like that's also another reason why I like cried almost every single day, because I just like everything in my life, nothing was going the way that I planned for it to go. From a medical standpoint, I'm still recovering since I still have this TBI, but only like mentally. I'm pretty much all there physically now. Pretty much. But mentally, I have the worst memory ever. A horrible memory. So that's my big thing. And it took me a while, but I realized mainly through therapy and through this special therapy, EMDR, for like traumas and stuff. It's like trauma therapy. It's amazing. But I realized through this therapy that healing from trauma doesn't change you back into the person that you were before. And maybe that's a good thing, because the new me has learned so many things that the old me never would have known. Now I just have a different outlook on life, and not necessarily better or worse. It's just like I have a different outlook on life. Like Tricia was saying, it's really everybody thinks, oh, that would never happen to me, but like it can. And not saying it will, but like things, unexpected events can happen to you. So for the whole first year, I felt like I was just constantly in my darkest hour, and I just had to keep remembering that nights don't last forever and that mornings always come, and I had to just stay down until I came up. And again, since I'm so stubborn and since I knew that I could come up, I knew that I had to come up. And I love this quote that says there's a past version of yourself that loves the progress that you made and like loves the person that you are today. And I like thinking about how there is a future version of myself that's even prouder of where I am, and I'm just so excited to meet her.
Oh my god.
I'm like tearing up a little bit. It was very hard like going through all of this, but I just have to shout out Emily. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. I thought I would do better like just freeballing it, but I probably should have written stuff down.
I mean, you've been doing great.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
let me just say five okays, then I'll be good. Okay. I have to shout out Emily and her husband Dan, because like right when this happened, they like both took charge as if they weren't going through the hardest moments of their lives like thus far. Emily like coordinated updates with like all of our family and friends, and people were dropping off meals, and she was like the point of contact for everyone, and she was fielding calls and texts and emails. Like she didn't get as far as I could tell, she wasn't stressed out about handling all of this. But meanwhile, I get one text and I take 5 hours to respond because I'm so like anxious. I don't know, she just was such a superstar, and I don't think our family would have like made it through this hard time together so cohesively and just like smoothly if she wasn't doing what she does best. And
she really was a rock.
She was
such a rock.
Yeah, and obviously my parents both were very strong throughout this too. Like I mean, we saw them at their lowest points, but like we also saw them being like so incredibly strong. Having like their youngest child go through this, I can't imagine. And it was just like full steam ahead. Like right when this happened, they're like, okay, like what do we have to do to get her better? And like they were just saying yes to everything that like people were recommending as far as doctors and Julia's like healthcare team. they were also doing very well, like keeping people updated and showing Julia like support and love even when they weren't sure if she could hear them, like we were saying earlier.
And also, when I was like recovering and everything, they had so much hope for me. They had nothing but hope for me, and I had no hope. I had zero hope for myself.
Yep.
And if they didn't have that hope for me, I never would have been back to the point where I'm at right now.
I just remember, like, I know that I said that I was knowing certain things that were going on when Julia was like in her coma and everything. I knew how bad it was, but in the back of my mind I'm like, Julia's gonna wake up. Like, I know she's gonna wake up. And I remember before I was able to go visit her, and she was in the hospital, and we were just pretty much FaceTiming with my parents and getting updates from them like through text and FaceTime. I was like, oh, like, make sure you take pictures of her because she's gonna be laughing about this, about how she looks right now. I'm like, she's gonna want to see this, take videos of her, she's gonna be so curious, like, but she's gonna wake up.
She's so correct.
And I'm happy we have these pictures now for Julia because she did have a lot of questions, and she does kind of look back and laugh a little bit at them too.
To cope.
But
again.
yeah, like, I felt like our whole family was very positive about it. We, like, it was such a grim outlook for her, but we were like, no, she'll be fine, she'll be okay, like, we know she will. Like, there's no possibility that she won't be okay.
And I needed you guys to have that confidence for me because I didn't even have it for myself.
Exactly, especially when Julia was, you know, like in the rehab hospital and like working to get herself back to health. It was hard. I don't think I could have gone through it. So you were able to like push through, which was very admirable.
Something that I always loved about Julia, just I feel like through your whole life, like, you are always just so who you are, and you lived your life, I feel like, growing up in a way where you didn't even care what other people were doing or what people thought. You're just unapologetically yourself, and I just always admired that about you. And throughout this process, we as in the extended family, were getting updates, and I feel like nobody knew. Well, maybe not nobody, but a lot of people in our family don't have medical knowledge, but everyone did just like rally together around you and had so much hope. And there would be times where we would get like a more scary update, but I do feel like everyone, and I don't know if it's from like just delusional hope or just like ignorance, but in my perspective, I feel like it just came from love and like knowing who you are as a person and being like, you know, if anyone can get through it, it's Julia. And that sounds so corny and cliche, but I really feel like that's true. And then just like putting into perspective like how much love people have for you. One of Julia's therapists, that was a recreational therapist, was a girl that I had known from childhood. We went to school together, and I ran into her. It was probably a year. It was last summer, so it was almost a year after your recovery, and she was not allowed to say anything because of HIPAA, but my mom brought it up to her, and she was like, oh my God, I'm so happy that you brought it up because I can legally say, yes, I did do that or something like that. So anyway, she didn't break HIPAA, but it came up. I just remember she said that you were so determined to get out of the rehab center by Christmas, and you had your journal, and we're all, I think, very spiritual, the three of us. And I remember you said you had a journal for manifesting, and you were writing, I will be home by Christmas. I will have Christmas at home, like just 100 times, like, or 1,000 times in this journal.
It's just the same sentence written over and over and over again.
Yeah. And she just said that she could feel it from you. So I mean, you already know this, but you're just like so loved, and you have so many people like rallying around you, just supporting you. And like, even if they don't tell you every day, everyone is, you know, rooting for you and loves you.
And Kelee reminded me, I actually talked about her one time when I was in the hospital, which I don't have any memory of, but
I'm just gaslighting you. I'm like, yeah, you woke up from your coma and you talked about me.
Immediately mentioned me.
Emily and Tricia texted me at one point when they visited you. So backstory a little bit, Julia and I always talk about how we're single queens. Like, you know, guys come and go, but we are queens on our own.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So they said that you woke up from your coma one day. One day. One of the things that you said in your state was Kelee Bovell cannot settle for a guy. She has to marry someone so amazing. Like, she just cannot ever settle in life. And I'm like, I have to never settle, because if I were to settle for anything, let alone a man's, like, this whole coma is for what?
Exactly.
Like,
What has this all been for?
right.
What was this all about?
Exactly. Never settling.
Never settle.
And neither should you. Or you.
And no one should.
Oh, do you want to say the thing? I feel like this is funny about Julia asking for the tea.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. When Julia was at the rehab hospital, the visiting was like a little bit more lenient. We could have 2 people go. So my sister and I went, Emily and I, which was nice. And so there was one time when we went to see Julia, and she was just like, so guys, what's the tea on so-and-so? And we were like, what? She's like, just what's the tea? And we're like, there is no tea. Like, there's nothing new to discuss about them. And it's like, okay, well, what's the tea on this person? And we're like, nothing. There's nothing going on.
I was just so desperate to, like, hear something dramatic other than myself.
Mhm.
Like, I was just
Yeah.
like, please tell me tea on this person, please.
Yeah.
You're like, somebody else has got to be going through something.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yes.
you have to make something up, okay?
Yes.
Like, come on. I was making up memories of, like, my friends having jobs that they never had ever at any point in their lives. And, like, I was having false memories of, like, who was in the accident with me. Because, like, I thought my one lifelong home friend was in the accident with me, and he wasn't. He was far from it. Like, he didn't even go to my school. Things like that. Like, I was just making up scenarios, and you know, like, I would say stuff and everyone would be like, well, are you sure about that?
And we had a lot of those discussions, like, at the rehab hospital. That's when we could really see that she still wasn't fully there mentally. I feel like her physical strides were going faster than her, like, mental recovery.
Oh, yes.
Which was fine and expected. But yeah, when we would visit her at the rehab hospital, like, we could tell that there was just a lot was still off with her. But I will say that people still ask me about how she's doing and just how amazing her recovery has been. And like we were mentioning earlier, like, she recovered faster and better than anyone could have expected. And yeah, people still ask me about her, and they're like, are there any differences with her now, like, post-accident, like post TBI, post coma, all that stuff? And I always tell people, like, I don't know if you feel this way, but from the outside, like, hearing you and seeing you, you're so positive and happy. And we noticed that right away at the rehab hospital. We would go and talk to her. She was always happy. Like, she was sad to be there, definitely. And it was dark for her to be there away from her family and, like, stuck in a hospital room. But, like, when we would go and visit her, it was happy conversations. Everything was so impressive and exciting for her. Like, everything you told her, she was so happy about it.
I was so easily impressed.
But you still are, like, that way.
Still
Like,
am.
everything is so, like, you could tell Julia, like, you could insult her and she'd be like, I don't know if I agree with you. Like, she's pleasant, like, she's just, I don't know, very positive. And I don't know if that's a personality change from the TBI, because you've always been a very nice, pleasant person, or I don't know if it's because you've been through this and now you're stronger from it, and you know what matters to you and what you can just brush off and, like, don't care about and stuff. But yeah, I remember we got together, like, shortly after the accident. So the accident was in November, and we got together in, like, April, I feel like, all of our cousins, and we were talking about the accident because, like, that's all we still talk about, I feel like. Not really, but
it's relevant.
yeah, I don't know. I just remember, like, the whole process of not being able to be with Julia in the hospital was very heartbreaking for me and, like, very upsetting. And like I said, Emily just seemed so strong through the whole process. Meanwhile, I feel like I was, like, not doing so hot and not being so strong, especially because I couldn't see her. I just wanted to be with her every day. I remember in April telling Kelly, like, I just always want to, like, hug her whenever I can. And, like, if anyone's mean to her, I just want to, like, give her a big hug and, like, tell her not to care. And, like, I don't want anyone to ever, like, say anything mean to her. I just feel very protective of her. And, like, I still feel that way. I'm sure you don't ever notice it because, like, I still tease her like a big sister, but I don't know. It was such a hard thing to go through, and I'm just so thankful.
Yeah.
Speaking of positivity, Julia, how do you feel about now making jokes about it? I know, like, when this was happening, Julia was removed from group chats and stuff. So, like, we have a group chat with a few of our close cousins, and Julia was removed. And then when she came back, we were like, welcome back. Like, hello. We were making jokes via poem and haiku, and we would be writing, like, Julia is back. The car did not stop her. I don't know. We were like making fun of those poems where people are like, she pushed me down, but, and then like 3 lines later, I am back. And we're like, those, like, I don't want to like call people out, but like,
I know.
Like those poem books that are just like these really inspirational quotes. And we were like writing those in our group chat. It was so insensitive, but it was so funny. And we're like, this is just like who we are, though. I feel like to not just like make jokes of everything, but like to embrace life in a lighthearted way. And I just wanted to know what your perspective is on that. Like, were you ever offended by any type of joke, or did you ever, like, was there ever one person where you're like, well, I can joke about that, but like, who are you? How do you feel about people making jokes?
I personally love it.
Yeah.
I love the jokes. I can't get enough of them, really, especially from like my family. Like, I think it's so funny. Like, no one has more of a right to joke about it than like obviously me and my family.
Well, you put us through hell.
Exactly. So you guys deserve to joke about it.
I'm kidding.
And my friends, I feel like people don't usually joke about it because they never know what they can and can't say. So like when talking about the accident, people tend to like walk on eggshells around me, which I also do appreciate because like
you're just being respectful.
It's just being respectful. Yeah. So I appreciate that a lot. But I feel like there's no joke that I can't handle, and there's no joke that I haven't laughed at.
Like you'll do something weird, and I'll be like, "Oh, that looks like something a stroke survivor would do."
Yeah.
Or, like,
yeah. And my brother-in-law always says, like, yeah, we always say that like your physical recovery is great, but your mental recovery is a little iffy.
Do you get offended over the trend that's like things that would send a person into a coma, and then they pick like a colonial woman or like George Washington into a coma?
No, I love those. And I actually have one in my drafts. That is crazy that you're saying that. Because I just have one in my drafts and I'm just waiting to post it.
As someone who was in a coma, here is 4 things that would send a colonial child into a coma.
I have it titled Things That Would Send My 19-year-old self into a coma.
A
car slamming into a tractor trailer at 65 miles an hour.
Because people say like things that would send my 6-year-old self into a coma and like stuff like that. Things that would send my 19-year-old self into a coma.
That is so funny. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that because I feel like there's so many jokes and like videos about that, and I'm sure some people are like, this is so disrespectful, and it's like, yeah, maybe it is, but you were there and you're you know.
I will say there's some people on TikTok that I like don't like, so if they've made those, I've been like, oh
yeah, you're like,
I don't like that.
I can make the joke, but who the hell are you? Yeah.
But everyone else that I love, I'm like, please make them, keep them coming. Exactly. Don't stop.
I wish I still had our group text with those poems.
I know.
Where we're like,
I bet
back.
I do. I do want to say though, like, I find it so weird how we like laugh about it and make jokes, but then like randomly, at least for me, probably for you too, but like random things will trigger me to remember where I was mentally, like going through all of this, and then I'm like, I feel like I'm back in that time. Like random people will ask me and about how Julia's doing, and sometimes I am just thrown back into November of 2021, and I'm like all of a sudden like I feel my heart rate go up, and like I'm like nervous and sad, and then I'm like, wait, no, she's like doing okay, like she's fine, and we're past that and stuff. But then like I can make jokes and I don't feel that way, like I don't get like triggered essentially.
So
it's very weird.
I definitely have triggers. I had this one therapy, it's called EMDR, it's called eye movement derealization or desensitization processing. In this therapy, I went through it and we did a ton of exercises of me like closing my eyes and like tapping my legs and like tapping my shoulders and stuff. And my therapist put me back into the position of like being in the hospital and put me back in my absolute worst memory and like made me process it in a different way. So now when I have these triggers, I kind of look at them, I notice them, I realize that they're there, but then I keep going with my day and I just move on from that. But they used to definitely affect me a lot, but now I don't let them.
That's amazing that therapy works.
Oh man, it works wonders.
I'm looking for the poems. Everyone welcome back. I found it. Everyone welcome back.
Oh my God,
Julia.
she found it.
Emily said, just make sure your brakes work next time. I wrote, her femur broke. The brakes broke. We broke down.
That is literally what would be in that book.
Wait, Kelly.
And everyone knows what I'm talking about, that book.
Oh, the poem books.
Kelly wrote, our hearts break, but the car did not.
That is funny.
That is funny.
I think that's it.
Oh, we're the only ones with a sense of humor.
Yeah,
apparently.
please.
The car broke. We broke down.
How did we start saying those poems, though?
Because we were making jokes about Julia checking her brakes before she drives.
Oh, my sister
Next
said heart
time.
breaks, heart.
Yeah, and then Kelly goes, our hearts break. The car did not. And then I said that. The spacing. We broke
So funny.
down.
Her femur broke.
That's so funny.
Man, I forgot about that. Oh, and also when I came out of
beautiful.
the hospital, like the first time I saw my friends and stuff, like my home friends and everything, because it was over winter break that I like came home, so all of my school friends were like in Boston and North Jersey and like all their homes. So my home friends came over and they were all like hanging out in my basement with me, and I was like, okay guys, sit down, like buckle up. I don't know how to tell you guys this, but I was in a car accident. And they
Buckle
were
up.
like, whoa.
Wait, for real?
I swear to God, because I had no, like, I was like, how are people, I'm not that important, like, how are people supposed to know that, like,
Yeah,
this
that's
happened to me?
That's
So let
actually
me-
really interesting.
Yeah, they were probably like, where did Julia go for a month? She's just been non-existent
She
for a month.
ghosted
and
us, that bitch.
Exactly, and I had to fill everyone in that I wasn't trying to do it on purpose. I
Shit.
just couldn't
No,
move
but-
my fingers.
So many people heard about this accident, and we got like letters in the mail from people we did not know from very far away. Or we got like emails or Facebook messages like, oh, my cousin in Ecuador is like putting you on the prayer list in her church. It was really cool. So everyone knew about Julia, not no one. But it was really nice. There were
It
some
was,
positives
it
that came out
was.
of it, and we just saw how much like support we had that we didn't realize that we had, and
That's
love.
amazing.
Yeah.
I think that was all of our notes. I'm sure we're going to listen to this and want to do more.
Yeah.
But that was a great place to start, I feel like. We pretty much
was.
talked about everything, I think.
Oh, yes.
We did jump around a lot, so
Yeah. Good luck editing that.
I'm just going to let it ride, I think. And just, this is how we talk about it, so this is how
Exactly.
everyone's getting it as well.
Just kind of word vomit, just this whole,
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's like how you think about it now too. Like you don't think about it in order from like it happened and then like 11 days later this happened. And you're just like, oh
Right.
shit, this all happened in like this one time.
It all blurs
frame.
into one
Yeah.
month.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like it could be cool if people have like questions or feedback or something. If we could like maybe do like a follow up. I don't know.
Yeah.
Of,
I
like,
would
just
love
like
to do a
20 or
Q&A.
like 30 minutes. Yeah. Or
Right.
I guess it could be
course.
longer if people are
Yeah.
interested. But I tried to ask a lot of the questions that I had from like an outsider. So if I missed anything or if people are wondering any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, especially on YouTube. And I'll try to collect all of them and we'll see what we can do.
That would be
Perfect.
cool.
That
Yeah.
would be.
Thank you so much for sharing the story. It's so,
Of course.
even though it's so traumatic and horrible and so sad, it's so interesting. And I feel like it clears up like you being willing to share about your experience, especially in the hospital and the coma and everything. I feel like that just, it helps people because it helps people understand that it is not glamorous and what you think happens in a hospital may be so different than what actually happens. And maybe now people can be a little more understanding and hopefully empathetic when it comes to any sort of trauma happening, especially medical trauma and everything that entails for the victims and the families.
Yeah. Yeah, I love sharing my view of all of it. I love doing that because I never really, not that I never get to, I don't want to say that, but like no one really understands the full extent of like my standpoint of recovery and the coma and the crash and everything like that. So it's just nice to share my side of it. It really is.
Yeah. And I feel like just looking at Julia, she looks great, and you would never guess she was in a car accident, but you also don't know what people are going through just by looking
Very
at
true.
them.
So
Very
true.
And I think that's just a good lesson to take away from this.
So true.
I know, actually, about that. So I was given a handicap tag to use, like,
her car.
in my car for, like, parking and everything.
Because she was walking with a cane.
Yes, I was walking with I was walker and then the cane, and I was just like, even after I advanced to nothing, I was still like limping a little bit. So they gave me this handicap tag, and there was one point where Devin and I, both of us, actually, we went to a store, and I parked in handicap because all the other spots, there was no other close spots but handicap. We got out and we were like walking around the store, and this one old lady came up to us and she was like, I couldn't help but notice I saw you guys in the parking lot get out of the handicap spot, and I just think it's really selfish of you guys to like take up that spot and like use that spot. And Dev and I were like, actually, this happened to us, so like we have a right to, because like we both struggle to like live our days. Like, again, that just like Trish said, you never know what people are going through.
What was
like,
her
never.
reaction when did you say, oh, actually we were in a near life threatening car accident and we're both on the lucky to be alive list, and shut your fucking mouth?
Yeah, and then she was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, and we are like, yeah,
as
right.
you should be.
Yeah.
It's like sad because I'm sure like she is like a social warrior, and she's like, you know what, I'm gonna stand up for the people that need to be stood up for. So like I'm sure she's had an experience like that in the past where the people are like, shit, you know what, you're right. I should not do that. But then when it comes to you, it's like, and I did get out of the car.
Yeah, I'm like, you're stating the obvious.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not gonna judge her. I'm gonna hope that she had good intentions. But yeah, you never know what people are going through. So keep that in mind.
Yes.
Always.
Yes, always.
Well, love you guys.
Love you. Love you so much.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. Let us know what you think of it. Leave some inspirational poems about car crashes in the comments. We can't wait to read them.
Can't wait. Specifically haikus, please.
Yes. Or like spontaneous prose where there's like a few lines indented, you know.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, we can't wait. Love it.
They're moving. They're touching. Like, they touched my heart.
I thought you were reciting a poem.
You both just stared at me and I was like, they're not getting it.
Okay, and now you can tell she really did have a TBI.
She is still on the fix.
Still working that back up, okay?
Anyway.
Oh, man.
Well, thanks for listening to our podcast. We love you, we appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.